So guys, the age-old question, how much force feedback do you actually need to be fast in sim racing? Some people run nothing, some people crank it all the way up, and today we're going to be testing out what actually works. I'm going to be testing 5 different force feedback strengths from 0 newton meters all the way up to 12 and compare lap times, consistency, and just generally how the car feels. So if you're thinking about buying a wheel or maybe upgrading, this video should give you a much clearer idea of how much force feedback you actually need. So how are we actually going to be testing this? Well, we're going to be going on ACC. The reason I choose ACC is because it's probably the sim I'm most comfortable in, so it's going to be probably the best baseline. On top of that, we're going to be using the Ferrari 296 on Mount Panorama. Obviously, we're not going to be changing the car setup or track conditions. Everything's going to be consistent, so there's got really no hidden variables. All right, guys, so here we are doing our first test. We're going to be doing 0 newton meters, so controls normally run at 50%. I'm going to be going down to 0. And this is basically no force feedback at all. We're going to be doing 10 laps and we're going to see how we go. Okay, so the first thing I noticed with 0 force feedback is that there's no centering force at all, which basically means that the wheel doesn't naturally return to the middle. You have to manually do it with your hands. So to set quick lap times, you pretty much need to know the track like really well and then predict how the car is going to handle through the corners. There's obviously no feel through the wheel, so everything is purely visual. So you're reacting to what you see on the screen rather than what you feel with the steering wheel. But to add to the centering part of it is that a big problem is that when you get into like say really complicated braking zones like the downhill section of Bathurst, the steering wheel isn't giving you any information whatsoever with like load or grip or anything like that. So you're basically assuming that you need to turn left a certain amount rather than the game just correcting it for you and keeping your car straight. Okay, so let's talk about lap times now. So basically with 0 newton meters, my best lap was a 203.020 and then the average lap was a 203.9. So I would say that that best lap was probably an outlier, to be completely honest, but again, it's the best lap, so I may as well put it in there. Now we're going to see obviously how this fares against the other force feedback strengths, but realistically, if you're running 0 newton meters, it's going to be very hard to be consistent and get good laps in. All right, guys, so now we are doing the 2.1 newton meter test. In controls, we're at 18% force feedback, which with the R12 12 newton meter base is 2.1. Same temperature, same setup. Let's go. Now this 2.1 newton meters is what you'll get in most of your Logitechs, your Thrustmasters, especially the belt driven and gear driven wheels. So this is your entry level force feedback. So with 2.1 newton meters of force feedback, the car started to actually feel good through the corners. Like there was a sense of grip and weight transfer, which made turning in mid-corner control like much more easier. It was like you actually have confidence going into a corner rather than just hoping that you're going to survive it. However, that being said, in the heavy braking zones, it still had kind of like the same problem as the 0 newton meter, where when you're turning in, unless you have like a really light grip on the steering wheel, if the rear kicks out or something like that, it's very hard to catch it straight away. And it's not that you can't catch it, it's just that the game isn't helping you catch it as much. Whereas say if you had a higher force feedback, the game would help you keep that car stable a little bit easier. So talking about lap times now, my quickest lap was a 201.282, which is pretty much 2 seconds quicker than the 0 newton meters. And then my average lap was a 202.33. Now, to put that into context, it's got this website called LFM for ACC, where it's basically all your daily racing and it's ranked and stuff like that. If you were to get that time in an LFM's top split race, you'd probably end up in the mid pack or something like that. And that's pretty good for a 2.1 newton meter wheel. And that's without even a lot of practice with that strength. So if I practice with that strength for a day or something, I'd probably even be able to get a better time. So honestly, very happy with 2.1. Like you can definitely get stuff done with lower force feedback and there's really no issue there at all. And yes, I'm sure someone is going to mention it, so I'll mention it now as well. With a 2.1 newton meter base, you actually can't run 2.1 newton meters. You'll probably only be able to run maybe around 1.7, 1.8. And that is because of force feedback clipping. And what clipping is when the wheel is already at maximum force, any extra detail gets lost, obviously. So it'll just feel heavy. Let's just say you go over a curb and it's already giving you its max output force. You're not going to feel that little curb because it can't produce any more power. So with any wheelbase, you're not actually going to be able to run at its full maximum potential. So just keep that in mind. If you say have a 5 newton meter base, you're only going to be able to really run it at maybe 4, 4.2, whatever it is. You'll have to just figure it out. And you can see clipping by the bar. Most games have them. So ACC has one on the bottom right. iRacing has one. Le Mans Ultimate has one. AC Evo has one. So you just got to kind of look at it and then adjust accordingly. All right, guys. So now we're testing out 5 newton meters, which is 42%. Let's try this out. Okay, so moving up to 5 newton meters, I feel like this is where everything really clicked. The wheel had enough strength to like really clearly communicate what the car was doing. So when I was turning left into the corner, I could feel the grip. I could feel when I was understeering. If I was oversteering, I could feel that, and I could actually correct it properly now compared to like with the lower force feedback, like we were saying, you really couldn't get that feeling, you really couldn't snap it in straight away. So it made it a lot more easier to trail brake, I'd say, which is an interesting thing, because obviously trail braking is being on the limit between oversteer and understeer, you'd say. When you have the force feedback to really feel that oversteer and understeer, it makes it a lot easier to do that, which obviously makes sense as it is. And this obviously feels, I'd say, maybe the most realistic out of all of them. Obviously I haven't driven a race car, but compared to a normal car and stuff like that, it does feel realistic. But another thing as well was consistency. I was a lot more consistent with this high force feedback, and I think that has to do with obviously the fact that in the braking I'm a lot more confident because I can control the car a lot more, which is a very interesting thing because I never thought that having more force feedback would help with your braking. But for me anyway, it did. Like all the braking zones and turning into the corners, that's where for me the force feedback made the big difference, not necessarily, you know, going through the long sweeping corners. So anyway, moving on to lap times. My fastest lap was a 2:09.67, and then my average lap was a 2:01.54. So comparing that to the 2.1 newton meters, that was 4/10 quicker, which isn't a massive difference if you think about it. But if you look at qualifying, like 4/10 can be the difference between first and 10th realistically. But the big takeaway from this, I think, is that the average lap is only 5/10 slower than my best lap. If you compare that to the 2.1 newton meter test, where my average lap was a second slower than my best lap. So there's a big difference in consistency there, and obviously showing that, you know, obviously being more confident on the braking and making less mistakes will help your lap times and stuff like that. So I think at the moment, the more the force feedback is increasing, the better our lap times and consistency is becoming. So 5 newton meters is looking good. Now let's go over to 9 newton meters. Okay, so 9 newton meters is where things get actually very interesting. I got my fastest lap of every single test at 2:07.40. I got my best consistency at 2:01.31. And on top of that, I feel like I could control the car the best at 9 newton meters. So why it gets interesting is because at 9 newton meters as well, I don't think I could do a very long stint with that. Like 10 laps and my hands were pretty much sore. Like my wrists were hurting. I was fatiguing. Now some people could probably handle 9 newton meters for a long amount of time, but personally for myself, I couldn't. So I think this is where you start getting the sacrifice. So like on a crazy qualifying lap, yeah, it worked really well because I could really feel everything the car was doing. But I wouldn't be able to do a 45-minute race at 9 newton meters and be this consistent. Like, yeah, I was consistent for those 10 laps, but I could feel myself, I was going to start making mistakes eventually. Now, something else to mention as well is that at 9 newton meters, my base was just like on the limit of starting to clip, especially on like the really long sweeping corners. Like it would just hit it and then move back. So at a 12 newton meter base, 9 newton meters is probably the max output you can get for ACC anyway. I'm sure it'll be the same for most other sims. But at the end of the day, I think it all kind of wraps around to like that 5 newton meter test where there's probably a sweet spot in between 5 and 9 where you're probably going to get, you know, the most amount of detail as well as being able to be as consistent as possible. And that is kind of what a lot of people would say realistically, but obviously now it's good that we're testing it out and we're figuring it out 100%. So whether that's 6, 7, 8, maybe I'll do some tests in the future to try to figure out exactly where my perfect force feedback is. Normally I run at about 6 newton meters, so it does kind of fall in line with that. But the bigger takeaway of this for me is that I feel like at 9 newton meters, I wouldn't again be able to handle that for a long stint. So I can get the lap times, but I won't be able to do that consistently. Alrighty, so now let's get onto the big boy, the 12 newton meter test. Alright, so at 12 newton meters, there isn't really that much to say besides the fact that the wheelbase was pretty much clipping the whole time. So you can see when I go into a corner, the bottom right, it'll be red. So that's basically, again, like I was saying before, I'm turning left and I'm just feeling 12 newton meters worth of force and nothing in between. So if anything, it kind of feels like you're running no force feedback, but just harder to turn the steering wheel, if that makes sense. Now, honestly, I just wanted to kind of see how we go. So I ended up with a 2:01.555 for my best lap, and then the average lap was a 2:02.46. So worse than pretty much any of the 2.15 or 9 newton meter tests, but better than no force feedback. So at least that's a win. Now, the one thing I want to note and why I wanted to actually put this in the video is that, like I was saying, I have a 12 newton meter base, but I can't run 12 newton meters. That is the same for a lot of people out there that have a lower wheelbase. Now, if you have a 2.1 newton meter base or a 3, whatever it is, and it feels really heavy, it might feel good But like I was saying in the clipping part of the video, you're not actually gaining anything from that. It's just a heavy wheelbase. You're not getting any information, and it's going to make you slower. So just keep in mind that if you do have a lower wheelbase or even a higher wheelbase, you can't run it at its max potential. It won't work out for you. So don't do it, basically. I know it sucks, and you're going to have to get used to feeling a really light wheel if you do have the smaller wheelbase, but it is what it is. You're paying for it. You may as well get the most out of it and be as competitive as possible, right? Another thing, obviously, at 12 newton meters is that it is very powerful. So even if you were to get a 21 newton meter base, for myself, I would not be running 12 newton meters for probably a qualifying or a race. Like, it is just, it's too hard on the wrists, and it vibrates like crazy, and you're fighting the wheel more than actually driving the car. But again, some people can probably handle that, whereas myself, I would not be able to do that. So I'd say for me, like max, I would go 9 newton meters. Okay, so let's conclude. Let's just basically get 0 newton meters and 12 newton meters out of the way. 0 newton meters, you're not really ever going to want to run that if you have the option to, so I would try and at least get something with a little bit of force feedback. 12 newton meters was very difficult. It's possible to be quick, but again, you're going to be fighting with the wheel. Now, if you did have a higher wheelbase, 12 newton meters wouldn't be clipping for you, but I still think that it's very difficult to actually drive consistently and for a long period of time. Now, the interesting ones, 2.1, 5 newton meters and 9 newton meters. Pretty much all within 5/10 of each other, but the difference between, say, the 5 and 9 newton meters compared to the 2.1 is that my average lap for the 2.1 was a second slower than my best lap. So that's just showing that consistency wise, it was a bit harder for me to be consistent with 2.1 newton meters. Now, if we're looking at the 5 and 9 newton meters, I think in between there, you're basically looking at the best force feedback strength. So it might be 6, 7, or 8, like we were saying before, but it's more or less figuring out what you can deal with for a long period of time. So if you're running 9 newton meters and you're strong enough to actually handle that for 30 minutes to an hour, however long you're going to be practicing for or racing for, then I would go with 9 newton meters. To me, I think it was a bit too much power for me, so I might have to drop it down a little bit, but the stats don't lie, and 9 newton meters was the quickest. Okay, so to sum everything up, more force feedback will make you quicker, but you've got to be able to probably handle the force feedback. It'll get to the point of where it's just like diminishing returns. You're probably not going to gain anything more. You're just going to be struggling to actually control the wheel. So I'd say if you are going to buy something, if you want to run around 2.1 newton meters, I'd probably get maybe a 5 newton meter direct drive base. If you can't afford that, or you can't set that up in your room or whatever it is, then a 2.1, Logitech or a 3 newton meter Thrustmaster or something like that is still going to do well. And again, as you can see, you might only be a few tenths slower. If that. If you're a quicker driver than me, then you'll probably end up getting a quicker time. So it's not that you can't be quick with lower force feedbacks. It's just that it's probably going to make it a bit easier to be quicker the more you have. So I'd say 5 to 9 is the sweet spot, as we've been saying. So if you wanted to run around that much, you're probably looking at like a 10 newton meter direct drive wheel or maybe a 12 newton meter direct drive wheel. I wouldn't say you need anything really more than that. Obviously, at the end of the day, if you have more, then you at least have that option to use more. But if you're looking at like money to performance, I'd say 10 to 12 is probably where your best bet is. So you guys, if you learned something from this test, please leave a like and subscribe. Hit that little bell button so you get notified whenever I upload. And also leave a comment down below of what force feedback you run and give me your opinions on what these findings are. I will see you all in the next one.